This is chapter 3, interpersonal communication in the self, communication and self-concept. I'm just going to be going straight through the text. If you prefer to read rather than listen, by all means, you can do so. I just want to provide another source for students if it is valuable for you. Communication and personal identity is how the text begins, and it actually tells you to do an activity. So I challenge you to do this with me now, and I'll list my things. You may have to pause your video in order to make this work, but it asks you to list the 10 features of who you are. The items on your list may involve social roles, like that you're a student, a son or a daughter, an employee, and it could also include physical characteristics, if you are attractive, short, friendly, or shy, athletic, or musical. It could include your intellectual capacity. If you feel like you're intelligent, maybe you don't learn as quickly as others. You could include your beliefs. Perhaps they're religious beliefs, they're beliefs about the environment, beliefs about how people should treat each other. It could be how you affiliate with others, the groups of which you're a part. It could be your social roles, the physical condition, and maybe you're healthy, maybe you're overweight. All of those things that make up something about who you are, list them 1 to 10. Now, it tells you to order the list after you have the 10 adjectives that describe you, or the 10 words that say who you are. And it says to number the first one as being the most important, the most vital to who you are. And then you go to the second most important thing. So I probably would list, I don't know, my social role as a mother, probably very high, because that's how I identify. My kids are my world is one of the, it's one of the first things I usually tell people. And my list, my religious affiliation. Then farther down the list, I'd probably put my physical condition. So I recognize that my physical condition changes, and that I have been thin when I was running marathons, and then I have gotten heftier and heftier as I've switched up my workout regimens. So that can change. I can certainly get skinny again. So that might be 10. So after you've got them numbered from 1 to 10 based on the importance that they have in your life, come back to this video. Okay, so you have these core components of who you are, right? I want you to do something with me. It's kind of an unusual exercise, but I want you to pretend like you're no longer number 10. That part of you is gone. It's erased. Do you feel like the same person? Has it changed the way that you would feel about yourself if number 10 was gone? Would it be positive, or would it be a negative absence? What about number 9 or number 8? If those two things were also not a part of who you are, how does it change you? How does that make you feel? Slowly let those different items dissolve from you, and consider how you would feel if that was no longer a part of your identity. Our self-concept is the relatively stable set of perceptions that you hold of yourself. Now, notice it says relatively stable, because all the time things are changing in our world around us, and we may feel more frustrated at one time than another, and so obviously things can change, but our self-concept is the way that when we look at ourselves in that mirror, we say, this is pretty much who I am. My best friend just the other day was telling me that she's nervous about the next part of her life when her children are gone and out of the house, and the empty nest syndrome. And she had some concerns. She had talked about other people we know, and she said, I don't know what to expect. And I was like, you're going to be the same person. You're not all of a sudden going to magically become something else. You're not going to change to that extent. The self stays the same. It's just the circumstances around you that change. Now, self-concept is your emotional state, the talent, how you view aspects of yourself. Self-esteem is how you feel about that self concept. So your evaluations of self worth. My daughter used to say that she was a shy person, and in our American culture, being shy is not necessarily valued, right? And I asked her once when she was young, does it bother you that you are shy? Does it bother you that you don't like to talk in front of other people? And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she said, no, she prefers it. And she said that other people, they talk too much, they should shut their mouths. Sometimes they say things and they regret it. Her self esteem was good about the way she identified in her self concept. She knew and she felt like she was quiet, and she felt good about that. It's interesting, though, how her self esteem has changed some over the years. As she's gotten older, she's had a greater desire not to be so quiet sometimes, not to be so shy. And a lot of that is because of the way that others consider quietness, the way that others consider being shy. So the self esteem is the evaluations that you make about your self concept. The way that you feel about your self esteem, if you have high or low self esteem, it has a powerful effect on your communication behavior. And it recreates itself, and you have that self talk that occurs within you that helps to perpetuate that behavior. So if you have a very positive self esteem, your textbook shows two different cycles. If you have a high self-esteem and it starts a positive cycle, you feel like you did something well, or you appreciate something about yourself, and so you affirm that with positive self-talk, and it recreates a desirable behavior. On the other hand, if you have low self-esteem, then whenever something happens, you qualify that and you say, well, of course it did, and you begin a negative self-talk. Self-concept develops over time. You're you sometimes some people believe in the idea that nature that you are born with um, a self-concept. I'm sorry, that you were born with a personality, that you were born with the way that you are. And others say that it's because of the way that you're treated, the reflected appraisal of others, the way that you compare yourself with others that affects our self concept and how we developed. CureC.com is a temperament personality test that lets you look at the innate parts of you that create who you are. And so if you want to go to CureC.com, you can figure out if you're a guardian, a rational, an idealist, or an artisan. And it also can tell you the percent of the population that are each of these different personalities. If you're curious, I am a rational, and I'm actually an INTJ, introvert, and intuitive, the thinking and judging. So I am a rational, and but you can check out the different ones. Sometimes I feel kind of maybe like an idealist. A little bit of that feeling side certainly comes out in me. But that is what that personality, that nature part. But then the way that we interact with others develops the nurture part, and that really affects our personal self-concept and the way that we feel about ourselves. So the nurture part, looking at reflected appraisal and significant others. Reflected appraisal is the mirroring of judgments of those around you. And your significant others are the people whose evaluations are especially influential. So the people that you actually care what they say. When a parent or a family member sends you signals that you are supported, that sends you signals that you are lovable, then you tend to mirror those judgments in your self-concept. Your self-concept can be seen as a reflection of the messages that you've received all throughout your life. And you tend to probably look for relationships that help to establish that preconceived idea of self-concept, the way that you see yourself. So you may have heard the saying that people who get out of one relationship seek someone that's just like the person they left, and they seek the same relationship over and over again. A lot of times that's because of that reflected appraisal and this idea that we create cycles where we expect that kind of behavior or treatment because of the way we perceive ourselves. A significant other is a person whose evaluations are especially influential. It could be a message from a parent, and it could also be another family member, a grandparent, a sibling, or teachers. The other people whose opinions matter to you are your significant others. So of course, the projections that they have on you, the messages that they send to you, are going to especially affect the perception that you have of yourself. As we get older, the power of messages from significant other remains, and your textbook calls it the Michelangelo phenomenon, and it describes the way that significant others sculpt one another's self-concepts. Romantic partners, people on the job, and many others can speak and act in ways that have a profound effect on the way that we view ourselves. Another part of your self-concept is developed through social comparison. So we consider the messages that we see all around us. We evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves to others, and we have reference groups, or those people against we evaluate our own characteristics. So I've got two different advertisements here. The one on the left, I believe it's been a while since I put this on here. The one on the left, I think is for Dove body products, and the one on the right is for Victoria's Secret, sending two completely different messages and the social comparison that's taking place. So if we look at others and we decide if we're superior or inferior by what we see, then when we are inundated with media that portrays one thing as being beautiful or perfect, then it can certainly have a negative impact on our self-concept. And it used to be that we saw this happening a lot with women, but certainly it does happen with men also, and children, as they look at the world around them and they determine their own self-concept and self-esteem and self-worth. So it's not just women, but men also compare themselves to media idolized male physiques and evaluate their bodies negatively. So we do have ad campaigns that are out that try to promote positive body images, but it only works when it's done as a whole. So is to watch a Dove Evolution commercial and a Dove Onslaught commercial. If you, I don't think, maybe I can provide the links, or if you just search them on YouTube, you can find the Evolution commercial and the Onslaught commercials. But they show how that our bodies and the way that we perceive ourselves is directly relevant to what we see going on around us. The interesting thing there is that the Dove is a daughter company of the umbrella is Unilever, and Unilever doesn't send the same message out through all of their products. So if you look up the Bomb Chicka Wow Wows and see how Axe or sells their products, then you can see that Dove and Axe have very different messages, and Unilever, as their parent company, is only out for one thing, and that's not necessarily positive self-esteem, but more to sell products. Dove responds to these criticisms by noting that each Unilever brand's advertising efforts are tailored to reflect the unique interests and needs of its audience. The Dove Skin Vice President Fernando Mercado wrote in an email to U.S. News. And so even though they may have some positive body image stuff going on with their ads, it is to reflect the unique interest of its audience, not necessarily to create a more positive society as a whole. The next part of your text looks at the characteristics of self-concept, and the first characteristic it lists is that the self-concept is subjective. It's your own personal interpretation of you. So sometimes our interpretations of ourselves are more positive, and sometimes they're more negative. And usually it's because of the people who are around us and the things that are said to us. And then it also is enforced by our self-talk and self-regulation. So your jokes may have been well received, or your grades may have been high in the past, but now things have changed, and people don't think you're funny any longer. So your self-concept may be too positive. You may think too highly of yourself when everybody else is like, dude, you're not funny. You see this especially with little children. The baby of the family has always been laughed at and has been so clever and so cute as a clown, but then in the classroom experience, behavior is no longer desired, and so they may think that they're funny and think that they're great, but other people are perceiving it much differently. So the way that someone looks at a person may be much different than the way that the person perceives themselves. Also, sometimes a person has a false sense of self-esteem and self-concept because they have been listening to distorted feedback from others that's been too favorable. So sometimes they're too positive on their self-concept because their mother has never acknowledged a wrongdoing. They've never, oh, my son never does anything wrong. And so if the child really applies that and believes that they can do no wrong, then it can lead to a false sense of positive self-concept. And then the third reason that we may have a negative or have too positive of a self-concept is because we just ignore the bad things about ourselves, and we fail to recognize that we are all fallible, and it may just be because you want to pretend like you're not. We also have negative self-concepts that can develop, and we see this very frequently. Everybody has negative moods on occasion, but sometimes these self-concepts and bouts of low self-esteem can hurt a person over the long term. So why do people begin to have negative self-evaluations? Of course, just like with being too positive about oneself, if other people are constantly influencing you and telling you how good you are and how that would lift you up, if people are constantly telling you that you're a failure, of course, that can reduce your self-esteem and self-concept. That distorted feedback can certainly lead to low self-esteem, and the feedback becomes distorted when we give it more power than it deserves. We have to put that into its place and recognize that there can also be praise, and we can encourage ourselves. Along with the obsolete information and distorted feedback, another cause for low self-esteem is the myth of perfection that is common in our society. We feel like we have to be perfect and present these perfect identities to other people. And what's very funny about this, and what's really unusual about it, is not only do we try to put this facade of perfection out, but then we also believe in American culture that you have to be very humble about that also. So while you may be perfect, you're not supposed to brag about it. And so this, of course, leads to some unusual ways that we view ourselves and our self-concept and self-esteem. And it's important that we recognize that a healthy self-concept is flexible, that we may be different people in different settings or situations, and to give ourselves a little bit of grace there. But self-concept does resist change. We have ideas of who we are, and we seek information that conforms to the existing self-concept. So we are constantly looking for people to confirm the idea that we already know to be true. And that's what I was talking about. Whenever you keep engaging in the same types of relationships, it's because of this cognitive conservatism that we are that we are involving ourselves in this. We seek information that conforms to an existing self-concept. We are reluctant to revise a favorable self-perception, which makes sense. If you were a thoughtful romantic partner early in a relationship, it's hard to admit that maybe you have been inconsiderate or less attentive. But it's also true that we cling to outdated self-perceptions in negative ways also. And even though you may have changed, it's really hard to change the inside. I've known people who had drug addictions, and they really view themselves as being addicts, even though they've moved on in their lives and have very successful lives and families after that. And so reappraising and recognizing self-worth can be very challenging whenever we have to adopt new self-concept or new self-esteem. Self-fulfilling prophecy. The self-fulfilling prophecy is a really cool concept. It's the idea that that our expectations of an event are likely to take place because of our behaviors based on the expectation, and then we say, oh, we'll see how this is true. There are 4 different parts to it. That you have an expectation, so you act in accordance with the expectation. Lo and behold, the expectation comes to pass, and then we reinforce the original expectation because the expectation happened, even though we probably made it happen. So the example that your textbook uses is you read your horoscope one morning and it offers you a prediction. Today you're going to meet the person of your dreams. So that's the expectation. I'm going to meet the person of my dreams. So you go and you get dressed up and you're smiling and you're happy, and you go to a party because you think it'll be fun, and also you're going to meet the person of your dreams, so you attend the party. Well, we've acted then and our behaviors have been in accordance with the expectation. So then if we meet the person, the expectation came to pass, it's not necessarily because of the horoscope, although it reinforces that, oh, the horoscope said it'd be true. It's because we've behaved in accordance with that expectation. The horoscope itself may have gotten the ball rolling with the expectation, but our behaviors and the way we interpret those behaviors are what really create this self-fulfilling prophecy. The interesting thing with self-fulfilling prophecy, though, is that they can be imposed on other people. So we have self-imposed prophecies where people believe that you're incompetent, that you're not good at something, and so then it results in that exactly happening. But there are other situations where, if you look at the Pygmalion effect or Pygmalion in the classroom, you can impose that self-fulfilling prophecy on another person. So this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, so it's one thing if you have an expectation for yourself and you act in accordance and it comes to pass and you reinforce it, right? But if you have an expectation for someone else and you behave in accordance, then that expectation that you have for the other person, because of your behaviors and the way that you treat the other person, can actually help that expectation to come to pass. Now, the example that your textbook provides shows that experimenters told that teachers that 20% of the children in a certain elementary school showed unusual potential for intellectual growth. The names of the 20% were drawn by means of a table of random numbers, like drawn out of a hat. 8 months later, these unusual or magic children showed significantly greater gains in IQ than did the remaining children who had not been singled out for attention. The change in the teacher's behavior towards these special children led to the changes in their intellectual performance. Among other things, the teachers gave the smart students more time to answer questions, they prompted them, and the children did better, not because they were more intelligent, but because there was an expectation of intelligence. The observer's belief created the self-fulfilling prophecy for the person who is the target of the expectations. The observer, of course, must communicate that belief, and verbally and non-verbally, for it to have any effect. But if you consider if a parent doesn't have an expectation for a child, how do you think that could negatively impact the children and their behaviors? So you can see this in a positive light where the children were treated favorably, they were given more time, they were prompted in different ways. Yes, you do know the answer, um, and encouraged, and so the students performed at a higher level. But you can also imagine how this could be very negative too. So if we tell a child that they are incapable of something and that expectation is planted, we act in accordance with that, then of course, whenever our child acts out or is demonstrating negative behaviors, it reinforces that expectation because we set them up for failure. The first part of the chapter looks at the intrapersonal, or the way that you look in at yourself, the way that you talk to yourself. The second part of the chapter looks at the presentation of the self and the way that we have impression management, the way that we share ourselves with others. So, our identity management or impression management are our communication strategies that we use to influence how others view us. We have both a public and a private self. Your perceived self is who you believe yourself to be in honest examination. So, whenever you consider who you are, your perceived self is who you really believe that you are. But we don't always present that perceived self, who we believe that we are, to other people. And so we have a presenting self, which is the public image that we demonstrate to others. Our face is what's considered socially approved identity. It's the way that we show ourselves and our socially approved identity. Face work is how we maintain face. In some cultures, there is a strong desire to maintain another person's face and to not insult them or to make them feel bad whenever they're around others. But all the things that we do to maintain this role or this identity, it's our face work. So, our identity management, I have this about, our we have multiple identities, and we try to manage all of this. But we've got what my mother thinks I do, what society thinks I do, what my husband thinks I do, what I think I do, what I really do, and what I really want to do. Maybe all be very different views and factors of the same person because we do construct multiple identities. Identity management is a collaborative process. As we perform like actors trying to create a front, our audience is made up of the other actors who are trying to create their own characters also. So it's kind of like always being in an impromptu or an improv session. So identity management can be deliberate or it can be unconscious. We don't always intend. Sometimes a photograph, for example, can get a real snapshot of who a person is. But our identity management, it could be very purposeful where we prepare ahead of time or we're thoughtful. And then sometimes things just slip out and we act spontaneously. People differ in how much identity management they do. And some people really make a greater push for impression, and they use social media sometimes to send off the right or the desired impressions. So, why and how do we manage our impressions? And you can take a look in your text as ways to manage those through our choice of setting, through our physical items that we have, our cars that we drive, our clothes that we wear, and how we try to portray ourselves to others. And you can also consider different social roles and personal goals and relational goals as a way that we manage impressions. We use face to face interaction and we use social media to create these impressions for other people. It's hard sometimes to disclose information about the self to other people, and self disclosure is the act of communicating to another person something about yourself. Some characteristics of self-disclosure is that it's honest, it's true, it's revealing, it tells them something they didn't know about you, it's exclusive, and you're not sharing it with everybody, but this is something that I'm sharing just with you. It gains intimacy by the context in which it's expressed. Maybe you've known somebody that like shared way too much information too fast. You see this a lot of times with social media platforms where the depth and the honesty maybe is not appropriate for the occasion. A lot of times in class, we play two truths and a lie, and we find out a lot of interesting facts about each other. Perhaps we can include that on the discussion board. I don't know how that would work, but if you've never played the game, the idea is to tell two true things about yourself and then something that is a big whopping lie. And it's interesting. The truths are always interesting, but the lies are interesting too. Like, why would you pick that? So the self-disclosure is supposed to be fun in nature. I have had students that shared information that was almost embarrassing for them. And so self-disclosure, you do have to consider the context and the relationship that you have with the other people and make sure that it's done in an. On page 89, we see a couple of models of self-disclosure. One is the social penetration model. The first dimension of self-disclosure in this model involves the breadth of information volunteered, like the range of subjects that's being discussed. The breadth of disclosure in your relationship with a fellow coworker will expand as you begin revealing information about your life. So as you begin to share more and more information, that circle can grow. The second dimension of disclosure is the depth of the information that's being volunteered. So we may not want to share the same level of depth with our coworker in a particular topic as we might share with a very close friend. On page 91, you see the self-disclosure in the Johari window, and it looks at our awareness of what other people know about us and through the relationship that we create with another person. So the Johari window just looks like a window pane, and in this window there are areas that are known to the self, and there are areas that are known to others. So when the grid and the things that we know about ourselves overlap with the things that others know about us, it creates an open window. We have open communication. We already know this about ourselves, and we know that the other person knows it about us. And then there are some things, though, that the other person can see in us, but we don't see in ourselves. Maybe I don't feel like I am good at a particular subject, but somebody else sees my success in that subject. And so I may be blind to the fact that I would be good at something, but somebody else may see my capabilities. And then there is on the lower left corner of this window a hidden area, maybe something that we know about ourselves but that other people don't know about us, that the other person we've chosen to keep this as a hidden area of our lives, we don't want to share it with them. And then the final pane of the Johari window is the unknown area, and in this area it's just you haven't been there yet with your relationship, so you're not really sure how that would develop or where it would go. Neither one of you knows this thing about you, and so it's impossible to verify, and I'm not even sure what all of that unknown area would contain. So if you take a look on page 91, it'll show you the picture representation of the Johari window. There are some benefits and risks of self-disclosure. There are some reasons that we self-disclose, and they are listed starting on pages 92 to 93, but you can probably think about it. So, like, why do you tell people about your personal desires or your personal needs? And for some people, you just do it because you want to get it off your chest. You just want to share with somebody. It's cathartic. It feels good to talk sometimes. And so that might be a reason that people self-disclose. People might self-disclose because they're trying to seek clarification. They want people to understand them. They want people to know what they're doing, or they might be trying to create positive impressions. And so self-clarification and impressions are a reason that people would share information about themselves. Sometimes we're looking to validate our own perception of the world around us, and so we tell somebody what happened because we're looking for them to understand and to say, "Hey, you know what? You're right." So we seek validation. I love this particular reason. It's called reciprocity. Sometimes we share because we want others to share. And so we build a sense of honesty through the sharing of the details of our lives, and we get to know the likes and dislikes. But it always feels weird when we're expecting our self disclosure to be reciprocated and the other person doesn't share anything back with us. But sometimes we do it because we want to learn more about another person. And sometimes we share information because of a moral obligation. We may need to share something that has happened within a classroom or within our own health with another person because of a ethical or moral obligation. Self-disclosure comes with a lot of risks. And so before you self-disclose, it's a good idea for you to consider if the other person is worth that risk. What are some of the risks of self-disclosure? Well, you risk rejection. They may not agree with you. They may not adhere to your ideas. They may have a negative impression of you after you tell them things about you. It may result in a decrease in relational satisfaction. It might mean that you hurt the other person or that there is a loss of that feeling of control that you have. So before you disclose, it's important to consider those guidelines. Is the other person that important to you that you would want to share the information? Is the risk of disclosing reasonable? Calculate the potential benefits of disclosing before you do so. Is the disclosure appropriate? Is it too much information? Is this other person also reciprocating the disclosure? Are they sharing themselves? And will the disclosure be constructive or destructive to the relationship? Because you don't always have to tell the whole, all of your feelings regarding a situation. So a lie is a deliberate attempt to hide or misrepresent. Sometimes we tell benevolent lies. We tell a lie that's not malicious. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, but we do it as a misleading of the truth because we're trying, these white lies, because we're trying not to hurt another person. But all lies are an attempt to hide or misrepresent that truth, and it's an unfair advantage over an unknowing victim. And so some people are firmly against ever lying, and some say, hey, a white lie is not always a bad thing. But there are ways to get around lying. So one thing that you can do is remain silent. If somebody asks you something and or if you're in a conversation, you don't have to share all of the things that are in your brain. So sometimes maintaining silence is an adequate response. Sometimes you can equivocate. You can communicate with language that has multiple meanings so that you're not sharing the whole truth, but at the same time, you are not exactly lying. So it's a statement that's not literally false, but it could be interpreted multiple ways. I love the example that it provides on page 101 for equivocal and true and false and clear messages. I often tell students that whenever I don't want to answer something directly, I'll I'll answer indirectly. I'll provide a different kind of statement. So I had known one student, actually at the time I was also a student, so she was in my class with me, and she had really long, beautiful hair, and she cut it very short. And of course, I'm walking up to the class, and you can't not notice. Like, you notice that she had a haircut. So not saying anything would have been very unusual, and there was an expectation for disclosure on how I felt about the haircut, right? Well, I didn't like it. I liked her hair long. I thought it was so pretty. But I knew that that wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to say, "Oh, I don't like your hair," which would be the truth. But the self-disclosure wouldn't work. So I could remain silent, but there was an expectation for me to say something. I could have lied. I could have said, "Oh, your hair looks great," but I didn't feel that way. And so a white lie could have been told in this particular situation. There was nothing she could do. She had already cut it off, right? Instead, I come up to her and I said, "Oh my goodness, you got a haircut." I didn't say if I liked it or not. She didn't ask if I liked it or not. But it was a way of me acknowledging something that was different without telling a lie. So that would be like an equivocation. "Hey, you got a haircut." And she was like, "Yes, I did." And I said, "Where did you get it done?" And then she provided her response. And I said, "Is it so much easier to get ready in the morning? I know your hair was really long. It must have been a challenge." So I related to her on a personal level without really having to share all of my true feelings about her choice. And she loved it, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter that I would have a different opinion, and that self-disclosure certainly would have hurt the relationship of us sharing this class together. It would have been rude. So you don't always have to be direct. All right, so that concludes chapter 3. I hope that you've been able to get a little bit of information out of it. I know that this has been a very long video. Whatever works best for you, if reading it, or I provided the link on the syllabus to the sources, the resources online with the outline and the quizzes, whatever works for you. But you may want to take a minute and quiz yourself over the concepts from chapter 3. And so here is a quick quiz for you to consider for yourself. You can pause it and answer those questions. All right.